In a quiet corner of the countryside, far from the noise and chaos of city life, there was a man who lived his dream. His name wasn't important. What mattered was how deeply he loved the land he called home. For 3 generations, his family had owned a sprawling ranch surrounded by rolling hills, tall trees, and lush green pastures. It wasn't just a place to live. It was a sanctuary. Every morning, he woke up early, stepped onto the porch with a cup of coffee in hand, and watched the sun rise over the horizon. The air smelled fresh, like earth after rain, and the only sounds were birds chirping and cattle lowing in the distance. This man worked hard every day. He tended to his livestock, repaired fences when storms knocked them down, and took care of everything else that came with running a ranch. Life wasn't always easy, but it was simple, and that's what made it beautiful. There was just one thing connecting him to the outside world, an old wooden bridge that spanned a narrow creek at the edge of his property. Now, this bridge wasn't fancy or modern. It was built decades ago, patched up many times, and creaked whenever a vehicle crossed it, but it did its job. Without it, getting supplies, meeting friends, or even calling emergency services would have been nearly impossible because the alternative route involved driving miles through unpaved roads, full of potholes and mud. So naturally, the bridge became essential not just for him, but also for others living nearby. Close to the ranch was a gated community called Sunset Ridge Estates. It was one of those neighborhoods where all the houses looked perfect, manicured. Lawns stretched endlessly, and people drove expensive cars. The residents were part of a homeowners association, HOA, which basically meant they followed strict rules about everything from the color of their front doors to how high their hedges could grow. These folks weren't exactly close-knit, but they shared one common interest: convenience. You see, the same bridge that connected the ranch owner to the main road also served as a shortcut for the HOA members. Instead of taking the long way around, they used the bridge to cut through to town. At first, the ranch owner didn't mind. After all, sharing is caring, right? Plus, he figured if they were using his bridge, the least they could do was help maintain it. That's why he set up a small toll booth on his side of the bridge years ago. Nothing outrageous, a few bucks per crossing to cover the cost of repairs and upkeep. Most people paid without complaint, though some grumbled under their breath about having to pay anything at all. But then things started changing. Over time, complaints from the HOA grew louder. They said the bridge was unsafe, too old, and a liability waiting to happen. Some demanded that the ranch owner replace it entirely at his own expense, of course. Others suggested he tear it down altogether since it wasn't up to their standards. He tried explaining that he couldn't afford to rebuild it alone, especially not to meet their luxury expectations. When he asked for contributions, they refused, claiming it wasn't their responsibility. Despite the tension, the ranch owner kept maintaining the bridge as best he could. He patched holes, tightened loose boards, and made sure it stayed functional. Deep down, he hoped the HOA would come around and realize how much they relied on him. But instead of gratitude, he got betrayal. One crisp autumn morning, he drove his truck toward the bridge, planning to check for any wear and tear before winter hit. As he approached, his heart sank. Where the familiar wooden structure once stood, there was now nothing, just rubble scattered across the creek bed. Splintered planks floated downstream, and twisted metal supports lay bent and useless. Someone had destroyed his bridge. Shocked and angry, he parked his truck and got out to inspect the damage. It didn't take long to figure out what happened. A notice nailed to a nearby tree confirmed his worst fears. The HOA had hired contractors to demolish the bridge overnight. Their excuse? Safety concerns. Apparently, They decided it was better to destroy something crucial than work together to fix it. Standing there, staring at the wreckage, the ranch owner felt a mix of emotions boiling inside him. Anger, frustration, disbelief. It was overwhelming. How dare they? This wasn't just a bridge, it was his lifeline. And now, thanks to their selfishness, he was cut off from the rest of the world. Deliveries couldn't reach him. Emergency vehicles couldn't get through. Even friends and family couldn't visit without going miles out of their way. As he stood there, clenching his fists, an idea began forming in his mind. If they thought they could push him around, they were wrong. Very wrong. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Little did the HOA know, their actions had awakened something in him. Something fierce, something determined. Something that would change everything for both sides. The ranch owner didn't waste any time wallowing in anger. Sure, the sight of his demolished bridge left a bitter taste in his mouth, but he wasn't the type to sit around feeling sorry for himself. Instead, he decided to take action, and not just any action. This was personal now. The HOA had crossed a line, and he wasn't about to let them get away with it. First things first, he needed answers. He showed up uninvited at the next HOA meeting, something he'd never done before. Normally, he stayed out of their business, figuring they'd do the same for him. But this time was different. When he walked into the community center where they held their meetings, all eyes turned to him. Some people looked guilty, others annoyed, and a few even smirked like they were proud of what they'd done. He stood there silently for a moment, letting the tension build. Then, without raising his voice, he asked the question that burned in his mind. Why? Why had they destroyed the bridge? Why hadn't they talked to him first? And why did they think it was okay to meddle with something that belonged to him? At first, no one said anything. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioner. Finally, one of the board members, a man who always seemed to have an opinion, spoke up. He rattled off legal jargon, talking about liability issues and safety codes. Another chimed in, saying the bridge was a hazard and that they'd been forced to act. But then came the comment that really stung. It's not our problem anymore. That smug remark hit him like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just the words, it was the tone, the attitude behind them. They didn't care. Not about him, not about the bridge, not about the fact that they'd essentially cut him off from the world. In that moment, he realized something important. These people weren't going to change. They saw him as insignificant, someone whose needs didn't matter as long as theirs were met. Well, he wasn't about to let them win. Driving back to his ranch, his mind raced with ideas. He knew he couldn't rebuild the bridge right away, not yet, anyway. First, he wanted to send a message. A clear, unmistakable message that messing with him came with consequences. So the very next day, he fired up his tractor and got to work. Using heavy machinery and materials he had lying around the ranch, he started blocking off access to the creek bank. Massive boulders were dragged into place, followed by steel barriers that made it impossible for anyone to cross even on foot. When some HOA members tried to protest, showing up at his property line demanding explanations, he simply smiled and shrugged. "You wanted the bridge gone?" he said, leaning casually against his truck. "Fine, but don't expect me to make your lives easier." His calm demeanor only infuriated them more, which secretly gave him a little satisfaction. Word spread quickly among the residents of Sunset Ridge Estates. At first, they thought the blockade was a temporary thing, a way for the ranch owner to vent his frustration. Surely, he'd come to his senses soon enough and rebuild the bridge, right? Wrong. Days turned into weeks, and the barriers remained firmly in place. No shortcuts, no easy commutes. Just a whole lot of inconvenience for people who weren't used to being inconvenienced. For the HOA members, this was a nightmare. Many of them relied on the bridge for their daily routines. Parents struggled to drop their kids off at school on time because the detour added nearly half an hour to their drive. Commuters found themselves stuck in traffic jams caused by the longer route. Even grocery runs became a hassle, especially for those who preferred shopping in town rather than driving further out. Some residents tried appealing to local authorities, claiming the ranch owner was violating public access laws. But here's the thing: they were wrong. The land surrounding the creek belonged entirely to him, every inch of it. And thanks to some clever legal advice from a sharp-tongued attorney he'd hired, he proved beyond doubt that he had every right to block access if he wanted to. The authorities couldn't force him to reopen the crossing. No matter how much the HOA complained. As the weeks dragged on, tempers flared within the gated community. Arguments broke out at HOA meetings, with some members accusing the board of mishandling the situation. Others muttered angrily about suing the ranch owner, though no one actually followed through. Meanwhile, tensions between the two sides escalated. HOA members drove past his property, glaring at the barriers as if sheer hatred could move them. He ignored them completely, focusing instead on his ranch and his plans. And oh, did he have plans. While the HOA stewed in their frustration, he began sketching designs for a new bridge. Not just any bridge, though this one would be sturdy, modern, and built to last. More importantly, it would be private property, owned and operated solely by him. As he worked on the blueprints, a mischievous grin often played on his lips. Because this time, things were going to be different. Very different. He envisioned wide lanes, reinforced steel beams, and state-of-the-art lighting. But the piece? The resistance? Automated toll booths at both ends, equipped with license plate scanners to track every vehicle that crossed. And the toll fees? Well, let's just say they wouldn't be cheap. Not by a long shot. After all, if the HOA thought $5 per crossing was unreasonable before, wait until they saw what he had in store for them now. Deep down, he knew this wasn't just about money. It was about teaching them a lesson in respect, responsibility, and the value of cooperation. If they wanted to use his bridge again, they'd have to play by his rules. And judging by the growing chaos in Sunset Ridge Estates, they were starting to realize exactly how dependent they'd been on that old wooden structure they'd so callously destroyed. As he hammered the final nail into the design plans, he felt a strange sense of satisfaction. This wasn't just revenge. It was justice. Justice for the years of complaints, the refusal to contribute, and the ultimate betrayal. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. The HOA would never look at him or that bridge the same way again. The ranch owner wasn't wasting any time. Once he had his plans for the new bridge ready, he got to work immediately. This wasn't just about rebuilding what the HOA had destroyed, it was about making a statement. He wanted something strong, modern, and impossible to ignore. Something that would remind everyone exactly who was in charge now. Construction began with a flurry of activity. Trucks rolled in, carrying steel beams, concrete, and heavy machinery. Workers from a local crew he hired buzzed around the site, laying foundations and assembling the framework. The old wooden bridge had been modest and simple, but this new one, it was a beast. Reinforced steel girders stretched across the creek, wide enough to accommodate 2 lanes of traffic. Bright LED lights lined the edges, casting a warm glow even at night. It looked like it belonged on a highway, not tucked away in the countryside. But the real showstopper came when the toll booths went up. Sleek and high-tech, they stood at either end of the bridge, gleaming under the sun. Each booth was equipped with automated systems, license plate scanners, payment terminals, and digital screens that displayed the toll fees. There was no room for negotiation here. Every car, truck, or vehicle crossing the bridge would be tracked, logged, and charged accordingly. And the fees? Let's just say they made headlines. For cars, the toll was set at $50 per crossing. Trucks? A whopping $100. If you were foolish enough to try sneaking through during peak hours, you'd pay double. To most people, these prices sounded outrageous. For the residents of Sunset Ridge Estates, they felt downright cruel. After all, they'd grown used to paying a few bucks or nothing at all to zip across the old bridge. Now, they were staring down the barrel of a financial burden they hadn't seen coming. When news of the tolls spread, chaos erupted. Some HOA members refused to believe it at first, thinking it was some kind of joke. Others stormed over to the ranch owner's property, demanding explanations. "This is ridiculous," one man shouted, waving his arms dramatically. "No one can afford this. What are you trying to do? Bankrupt us?" The ranch owner didn't flinch. Leaning against his truck, arms crossed, he simply smiled. "You wanted the bridge gone," he said calmly, echoing his earlier words. "Now you've got your wish. But if you want to use mine, you'll have to pay for it." His tone was firm, almost casual, as though he'd already moved past caring what they thought. And honestly, he had died as the days passed. Frustration within the HOA reached a boiling point. People gathered in huddles outside their pristine homes, whispering furiously about what to do. Petitions were drafted, meetings were held, and angry emails flew back and forth. A few brave souls tried appealing directly to local authorities. Again, hoping someone would step in and shut the whole operation down. But as before, there was nothing anyone could do. Legally, the bridge and everything attached to it belonged to him. End of story. Some residents decided to test the system. They drove up to the toll booths, expecting glitches or loopholes. Surely this was all just a bluff, right? Wrong. The moment they approached, the scanners lit up, reading their license plates instantly. Digital screens flashed the fee, and automated voices instructed them to insert payment. No cash accepted, only credit cards or mobile payments. Even those who tried reversing out of the lane found themselves blocked by gates that swung shut behind them. There was no escape unless you paid up. It didn't take long for social media to catch wind of the situation. Photos of the shiny new bridge and its imposing toll booths went viral. Locals joked about it online, dubbing it the Golden Gate of Greed and speculating how much money the ranch owner must be raking in daily. Memes popped up everywhere, poking fun at the plight of the wealthy HOA members who suddenly found themselves at the mercy of a man they'd once dismissed. Meanwhile, the ranch owner leaned into his newfound reputation. He hosted barbecues on the bridge itself, inviting friends, neighbors, and curious onlookers to celebrate its grand opening. Free crossings were offered to anyone who showed up, along with cold drinks and live music. It became an event, drawing crowds from miles around. As locals laughed and enjoyed themselves, the HOA members watched bitterly from afar, fuming over the irony of being locked out of a party happening on what used to be their shortcut. Of course, not everyone took the tolls lying down. A group of particularly vocal HOA members organized protests outside the ranch, signs reading "Tyrant Tax" and "Right to Passage" dotted the landscape, while megaphones blared demands for fairness. At one point, a small crowd marched onto the property, only to be met by security cameras and stern warnings to leave or face trespassing charges. Word quickly spread that the ranch owner had installed surveillance equipment along the entire perimeter, ensuring no one could sneak through without consequences. Despite the backlash, many outsiders sympathized with him. Stories about the HOA's arrogance surfaced, painting them as entitled bullies who'd gotten exactly what they deserved. Old-timers in the area recalled how the HOA had always acted superior, treating rural landowners like second-class citizens. Now, they had finally met their match, a man who refused to back down. No matter how much pressure they applied, life settled into a strange rhythm. For the ranch owner, things were better than ever. The toll revenue poured in steadily, covering construction costs in record time and leaving plenty left over for maintenance. More importantly, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing he'd turned the tables on the very people who tried to push him aside. For the HOA, however, life became increasingly miserable. Some families started looking for ways to move out, unable to stomach the daily toll fees. Others cut back on trips to town, opting instead to stockpile groceries or shop online. Arguments broke out regularly, both inside households and at board meetings. Finger-pointing became the norm, with everyone blaming someone else for letting things spiral so far out of control. And yet, despite the mounting tension, neither side budged. The ranch owner stood firm, refusing to lower the fees or reopen negotiations, until the HOA acknowledged their mistakes. Meanwhile, the HOA dug in their heels, convinced they could wear him down eventually. Neither realized just how much longer this standoff would last, or how far-reaching its consequences would be. Little did they know, the battle over the bridge was far from over. In fact, it was about to take a darker turn, one that would test everyone involved in ways they never expected. The standoff between the ranch owner and the HOA had reached a boiling point. What started as a clash over a bridge had turned into a full-blown war, with both sides digging in their heels and refusing to budge. But as tensions escalated, so did the drama, and not all of it stayed above board. It began subtly at first. Small acts of vandalism popped up around the ranch. One morning, the ranch owner found his tractor tires slashed, leaving him stranded without his primary work vehicle. At first, he chalked it up to random mischief, but when his barn was set ablaze one night, he knew it wasn't just kids messing around. The fire destroyed part of his equipment and left a charred scar on his property. Thankfully, no animals were hurt, but the message was clear. Someone wanted to send him a warning. Suspicion immediately fell on the HOA. While no one could prove involvement, it didn't take a genius to connect the dots. After all, who else had the most to lose from the toll bridge? The ranch owner wasn't about to sit back and let this slide. If they wanted to play dirty, he'd raise the stakes literally. The next day, he doubled the toll fees overnight. Cars now cost $100 per crossing, trucks $200, and peak hour rates skyrocketed even higher. He also installed security cameras along the perimeter of his property, ensuring every inch was monitored 24/7. Signs went up warning trespassers that they'd be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. For good measure, he hired a local security firm to patrol the area, making sure no one tried anything sneaky. This move only fueled the anger within Sunset Ridge Estates. Some residents called it extortion. Others accused him of holding them hostage. Tempers flared hotter than ever, and protests outside the ranch grew louder and more frequent. Signs reading "Tyrant Tax" and "No Bridge, No Peace" became common sights, while megaphones blared demands for fairness. A few brave or foolish HOA members even attempted to blockade the entrance to his property, hoping to cut off deliveries or visitors. It didn't work. The security guards politely but firmly reminded them that blocking access to private land was illegal, and anyone who refused to leave would face arrest. As the conflict dragged on, cracks began forming within the HOA itself. Some members started questioning whether destroying the original bridge had been such a great idea after all. Others admitted privately that they regretted not helping maintain it when they had the chance. Arguments broke out regularly at meetings, with accusations flying back and forth about who was responsible for the mess. The once unified group was fracturing under the weight of their own decisions. Meanwhile, the ranch owner continued living his life as if nothing had changed. He woke up early, tended to his cattle, repaired fences, and watched sunsets like always. But there was a new edge to him, a quiet confidence that came from knowing he held all the cards. Every time an HOA member crossed the bridge, paying the hefty toll with gritted teeth, it felt like a small victory. And every time someone complained, he simply smiled and shrugged. "You made your bed," he'd say, "now lie in it." Despite the chaos, many locals sided with him. Stories of the HOA's arrogance spread far and wide, turning public opinion against them. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves began stopping by the ranch to offer support. Farmers dropped off extra supplies, mechanics volunteered to help, fix damaged equipment, and even strangers passing through left notes of encouragement. It was as if the entire community had rallied behind him, united by a shared disdain for the HOA's entitled behavior. But the situation took a darker turn when rumors of sabotage started circulating. Late one night, a truck carrying construction materials for bridge repairs was found overturned on a nearby dirt road. The driver claimed he'd been forced off the road by another vehicle, though no witnesses came forward. A week later, someone tampered with the toll booth systems, causing temporary glitches that allowed a handful of cars to pass without paying. The ranch owner quickly fixed the issue, but the message was clear: whoever was behind these attacks wasn't giving up. Instead of backing down, he leaned into the chaos. He hosted another barbecue on the bridge, inviting everyone except the HOA members. Free crossings were offered to attendees, along with live music, food trucks, and games for kids. Locals flocked to the event, laughing and enjoying themselves, while the HOA watched bitterly from afar. Social media lit up with photos and videos of the festivities, mocking the wealthy homeowners stuck on the other side of the creek. Golden Gate of Greed memes made a comeback, poking fun at their predicament. By now, the toll bridge saga had become local legend. People drove from neighboring towns just to see it for themselves, marveling at the shiny steel structure and its imposing toll booths. Some even paid the fee just to say they'd crossed it, snapping selfies along the way. For the ranch owner, it was both vindication and validation. He'd gone from being dismissed as insignificant to becoming the center of attention, and not because of pity, but because of respect. Still, the financial strain on the HOA was undeniable. Families began moving out, unable to afford the daily tolls. Those who stayed cut back on trips to town, opting instead to stockpile groceries or shop online. Kids missed soccer practices, parents struggled to get to work on time, and doctors' appointments were delayed because of the detour. Life in Sunset Ridge Estates had become inconvenient, expensive, and downright miserable. Yet, despite everything, neither side showed signs of backing down. The ranch owner stood firm, refusing to lower the tolls until the HOA acknowledged their mistakes and contributed fairly to maintenance. Meanwhile, the HOA dug in their heels, convinced they could wait him out. Neither realized how close they were to reaching a breaking point, one that would force them to confront the consequences of their actions head-on. Unbeknownst to either side, the battle over the bridge was about to take an unexpected turn. Someone was about to step in and change the game entirely. Months had passed since the toll bridge became the center of everyone's attention. The ranch owner and the HOA were locked in a stalemate, neither willing to budge an inch. But as time went on, cracks began showing not just within the HOA, but also in the resolve of some residents who were tired of the constant stress and financial burden. For the people living in Sunset Ridge Estates, life had become unbearable. The daily tolls added up quickly, especially for families with multiple drivers or those commuting long distances for work. Some residents resorted to carpooling, cramming into one vehicle to split the cost of crossing. Others tried finding alternative routes, but the detours only made their commutes longer and more frustrating. Grocery trips turned into logistical nightmares, with parents loading up SUVs to avoid multiple crossings in a single day. The strain wasn't just financial, it was emotional too. Neighbors argued over who should pay when sharing rides. Parents snapped at their kids after stressful mornings stuck in traffic. Even friendships started fraying as resentment built toward those perceived as freeloaders who refused to chip in fairly for shared expenses. What had once been a tight-knit community now felt fractured and tense. Desperate for relief, a small group of HOA members decided to approach the ranch owner privately. They didn't want another public confrontation. They'd seen how those ended, but they hoped that behind closed doors, they could negotiate a solution. One evening, they showed up at his property gate, waving white flags, literally to signal their peaceful intentions. At first, he hesitated to let them in, but curiosity got the better of him, so he invited them inside. The meeting took place in his barn, surrounded by hay bales and the faint smell of livestock. It was far from formal, but it was honest. The HOA representatives admitted they'd made mistakes destroying the old bridge without consulting him, refusing to contribute to repairs, and underestimating how much they relied on it. They acknowledged that their actions had caused harm not just to him, but to themselves as well. Then came the offer. They would pay half the cost of rebuilding the new bridge if he agreed to lower the toll fees to something reasonable. At first, the ranch owner listened silently, his arms crossed, an expression unreadable. When they finished speaking, he leaned back and sighed deeply. He knew this moment marked a turning point, not just for them, but for himself too. Holding on to anger felt good for a while, but it was exhausting. And truth be told, he never wanted things to escalate this far. All he'd ever wanted was respect and fairness. After a long pause, he nodded. "Fine," he said finally. "We can make a deal. But there are conditions. First, the toll fees would drop significantly to $5 per car and $10 per truck, but they wouldn't disappear entirely. Second, the HOA had to agree to contribute annually toward maintenance costs, ensuring the bridge stayed in good condition for years to come. Lastly, they needed to sign a legally binding agreement stating they couldn't interfere with the bridge again unless mutually agreed upon. The HOA reps didn't hesitate to accept. Anything was better than the current situation, and they knew. They'd gotten off lightly considering what they'd put him through. Within days, lawyers drafted the paperwork, and both parties signed on the dotted line. For the first time in months, there was a glimmer of hope that things might return to normal, or at least something resembling it. True to his word, the ranch owner adjusted the toll fees almost immediately. Cars flowed smoothly across the bridge. Once again, though drivers still grumbled about having to pay anything at all. Still, compared to the astronomical rates they'd endured before, $5 felt like a bargain. Life in Sunset Ridge Estates slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Kids went to school on time, parents commuted without dreading the extra miles, and grocery runs became manageable again. As for the ranch owner, he found himself in a surprisingly good place. The money from the tolls and the HOA's contribution to the bridge's construction had left him financially secure for the first time in years. More importantly, he felt a sense of peace. Sure, relations with the HOA remained frosty, but there was mutual understanding, now an unspoken acknowledgement that cooperation benefited everyone involved. Word of the resolution spread quickly, and locals couldn't help but feel a mix of satisfaction and amusement. Many saw it as poetic justice, a lesson in humility for the wealthy homeowners who thought they could bulldoze their way through problems. For others, it was proof that standing your ground paid off in the end. The ranch owner became something of a local legend, a symbol of resilience and determination. Even the HOA learned valuable lessons from the ordeal. Their arrogance had blinded them to the realities of rural life and the importance of working together. They realized that treating someone as disposable because of their background or circumstances only created enemies where allies could have existed. Some members even started attending community events outside the gated neighborhood, attempting to mend fences beyond just the literal one. Years later, when visitors crossed the sturdy new bridge, they'd often hear whispers of the Great Bridge, War of Sunset Ridge. Locals loved recounting the story, embellishing details with each retelling. The demolished wooden structure, the outrageous toll fees, the protests and sabotage, it all became part of local folklore. People joked about the Golden Gate of Greed, though now it carried a tone of admiration rather than mockery. For the ranch owner, life returned to its simple rhythms. He woke early, worked hard, and watched sunsets over the horizon. The toll booth still stood, collecting modest fees that ensured the bridge's upkeep, but it no longer dominated his thoughts. Instead, he focused on what truly mattered: his land, his animals, and the quiet joy of living life on his own terms. And every time he drove across the bridge, he allowed himself a small smile. Not because of the money or the power he'd wielded, but because he'd proven something important, not just to the HOA, but to himself. Standing your ground didn't mean burning bridges. It meant building stronger ones.